19, around 5'3", blonde hair, blue eyes, pale skin, and freckles. Boom, done. Move on. And then you never cover what she looks like again for the rest of the story unless there's a significant change, like her hair getting dyed or
Mhm.
her arm gets chopped off or something crazy. Um,
Sounds
and
like
same with
something you would do.
right, yeah, I know, yeah, and same with the descriptions of your homes. So it's if Heather 19 lives in a house with her roommates, you might say a two-story house on a college campus with roommates, smells like stale beer and popcorn. It gives us an idea of what that probably looks like without having to feed us all of the information, right?
Mhm.
We know it's basically like a fraternity of some sort.
Right. Um, I was kind of I've read your scripts, but I could never remember after I've read them, like paying attention to certain detail, like the description of the character. So it is interesting that coming from a cinematographer background, maybe have you always liked it where you're doing more description, or was that from going through classes and writing scripts and stuff like that, where you decided you'd like to include that in your stories too?
Uh, I I've always done really good with writing. Like before I even went to film school, I was the only class I got straight A's in was English and writing class. So, that was a thing. But I would say that with practice, descriptive writing becomes easier because now I think as a writer for me, whether it's a screenplay or it's a narrative story, short or long form, I want to write what I'm envisioning because I want people to see what I'm seeing. Because in my head, I'm thinking like in my head, it looks awesome, right? So my script, and I'm not going to say too much, but we'll just say my dear script. I think you know what I'm talking about, Justin. I'm very descriptive on what's happening because it's insane. It's over the top. It's ridiculous. There's firefights and missiles and laser beams and all this crazy stuff. And so I want the readers to know what's happening because that's going to help fill in all the gaps within the story. They get to see like, okay, I see what's happening. This is going to be the budget, right? Because when you're writing a
Mm.
screenplay, you want to make sure they know roughly what the budget is once they start getting into development and pre-production. And so, yeah, I think that carried over quite a bit with some of my narrative writing. I think one of the things that I like to do, there's a short story that I did called Marigold, and it's about a vampire who is basically talking about the love of his life, who's dying in his arms, a human,
Mm.
and we're very emotional. We're in his mind, in his heart, kind of like gathering what's happening, and at the very end, we find that he's the one who killed her. But you know, one of the things I say is, and I like using descriptive words like this, so I like to uh, take something natural or what would be a paranatural. So in this case, uh, he bites her on the neck and she gets like blood starts pouring down her neck, right? So I like to associate that with various items. And I believe what I wrote was something like he pierced her neck and she had two ribbons of blood curling or slithering down her neck. Like I use these descriptive words to kind of, of like ribbons and a snake slithering. And it kind of gives you this other idea of what's happening here, in a more poetic way, I guess. I guess that's the best way of putting it. I like to write poetically in many instances. Um, I did the same thing with Wendigo, which is a story about a Wendigo that appears on an island after a yacht crashes into it. Like it uh, capsizes in a storm,
Mhm.
ends up on this beach, and it's just this craziness that's happening. This guy's all alone. There's these dead bodies. He doesn't know what's happening. And I use very descriptive, figurative words to try to present the audience with what's truly happening, in a poetic way. And I think that's just something that I've grown to do over time. And it's something that I find a lot of fun. When I look at a color, I think of a color, I'm like, okay, what's the most interesting way that I can like describe this color, because it's not just yellow. It's like it's like the yellow of the summer sun at 12 in the afternoon in South Georgia. It's like that kind of yellow. What does that mean? I don't know, but it sounds fun and it kind of gives you this sense of heat and warmth and brightness and beauty.
Yeah, and I mean there are a lot of writers that do that or use descriptive words that wouldn't necessarily apply to what they're trying to describe. But I like that writing style just because it gives a little more depth to the story itself.
Right.
But all right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody. Once again, this is Right in the Pickle Barrel, and we are talking about how you can get to know your characters and basically your writing style and the way you present your characters to your audience. Uh, Specifically, we're talking about character decisions, backstories, how backstory influences your character's decisions, and so on and so forth. So we just finished talking about physical descriptions and how you can do that, and that's in relation to the way your character looks, but also in the way that you describe your scenes. Now, again, not everyone's going to do this the same way. It's really entirely up to the writer's preference. If you're someone who loves to write and be very detailed, then you should do that. If you're someone who's a little more vague, then that's okay. You can be more vague. Uh, but just know that either way, when you go into the editing process and you have someone editing, you may get a like, hey, this isn't very descriptive. Can you add more? Or hey, this is too much. Can you pull it back a bit? So you're gonna have to try to find that balance in there somewhere. But for the most part, it's just really up to your personal preference.
Yeah, I have a writer friend who's done a lot of editing for stories for the Writers Guild that I created, and he uses what he calls the left hand of God method for editing.
Okay.
He's very brutal, but he'll joke at the same time when he's editing. Just so he's not completely bashing somebody in the face with this is what you need to change type of thing. But I like his editing style because he will tell you straight up you need to add more to this or uh this is not the don't be so cliche to end it this way or stuff like that.
Right.
And as much as I do appreciate his editing, at the end of the day, I'm the writer. I'm going to decide what it is. Now, being traditionally published, you might not always have that option,
Right.
but
Oh yeah. I mean, when it comes to traditionally published, it's very similar to a production company that's producing your film. In the end, it's the publisher who's going to have the final decision and some rights to the story. In the way they
mhm,
have partial ownership to it. So ultimately, if you want to be published with that company, then you have to more or less do what they say, unless it's otherwise stated within the contract, um, which can be frustrating, of course.
right.
But you I hear it time and time again about screenwriters, especially from screenwriters. And this aren't just, amateur screenwriters. These are famous screenwriters working regularly in Hollywood who will sell a script and then that script gets flipped and changed and flipped and changed. And by the time it comes out on the other side, it's a completely different story. Once it's out of your hands, that's it. Or if you're working with a production company and you give them the script, then they'll be like, okay, this is cool. Well, let's change this, and this, right? I know initially, I believe Jaws was supposed to be written as a whale instead of a shark, and that got changed. So there's always something that you have to be on the lookout for and be ready for. When an editor, in this case, is looking at your story, you want them to be brutal. You want them to tear it apart. And whoever you send it to, like maybe it's not just your editor, maybe you're sending it to proofreaders, let them tear it apart. I've known plenty of people who have, written screenplays or made a short film or something, and they send it to me, and the only thing they ask is only this. They say only tell me what's good about it. Telling you what's good about something
Right.
doesn't help you. It doesn't.
Right.
It just I tell you what's good, and then the rest of it sucks. And guess what? People will see that. So basically, you need to take it on the chin, let go of the pride, and be ready to just, take the hit and
Right.
trust that whatever's being told to you is going to be better for the story. This isn't a process where it's like you write one and then you're done. This is like, you write an initial um, manuscript, and then it's edited or revised, and then you write it again. It's proofread, revised, you write it again. You're going through 6, 7 revisions before it's finally being sent to the publisher house to get
Mhm.
printed. So it's a process, guys.
Yeah, I agree. Don't, because if I wanted what was good about only what's good about it, I would just send it to my family and hear the "that's a good job" pat on your back type answer, which is why I've started really making sure I use other writers and people that are more than just friends to me. Like Eric has always been a huge asset to me to send my story to pull it apart and be like, you need to add way more to this, or uh he'll add just certain words or
Yeah.
something that changes the feel of that particular sentence or paragraph.
Yeah. I'll
So
tell you what. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you. I
no.
This is something. No, no, hold on. Quick side note. This is something that I've noticed often, regularly, is where someone's talking and like I have to like add something in, and I cut them off. And I noticed it when I was working with the NFL this past week, and I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, let people finish what they're saying. So it's something I need to. I'm trying to be,
Better.
better at and like notice, and I'm failing today. So I'm sorry. But what I was going to say is one of the things that always frustrates me, and not that Justin always does this, but he's done it a couple times where he'll send me his manuscript, a chapter or two, whatever, and I'll read through it. I'll say, this is off, and you should do this, or need to do this, and this. And he's like, okay, I'll think about it. And I'm like, no, like you need to do this, Justin. Like, don't think about it, And it's just like, so many people that I've talked to, in the end, they want it to be their piece, and so it's like, okay, I'll think about it. And if you're a indie publisher, you're publishing your own. It is what it is. Okay, cool. You don't want to take the advice, that's fine. But if you want to get published by an actual publisher, by a big publisher, then you're going to have to make the changes. Otherwise, they can simply cut you, and that's it. Game
Mm.
over. So just be wary of that.
So let's get back to characters.
Yes.
We'll
So
cover more on editing in another episode.
yeah. So the last thing we really want to talk about here in regard to characters is really your character's personality. And in particular, we want to know, how does the personality of a character separate them from other characters, right? Because I think a lot of us in our own head, we tend to write characters who all seem very similar. They kind of act the same, react the same, talk the same. And that's something we want to be very careful of. And this goes back to kind of like your pre-writing, to your outlining and stuff. The reason that you set up an outline in which you're writing descriptive pieces to your characters, give them backstories so that you can start to separate them from each other and give them separate personalities.
Mm. Yeah. I I tend to do that sometimes with my male characters, depending on the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I do notice it at times, so that I make sure that I change that when I'm catching it. But
Mm-hmm.
um I think for the most part I've never really had too much problem, but I do notice it on occasion. And that's something that really you really need to catch early on, especially if you're just starting to be a writer, because if you're writing all the characters have the exact same personality,